Recording, so I'll just go back to the start again if members will just bear with me for a second, and I'll take this adherent of this morning's meeting. So, as we've said, Councillor Allison, Anderson, Bradley, Brown, Chalmers and Convery are all here. Councillor Cooper. Nothing from Councillor Cooper. I have apologies from Councillor Corbett. Councillor Harrow, could you confirm that you're at the meeting and substituting for Councillor Corbett, please?
I am now, yeah.
Thank you. I see that Councillor Craig is here, Councillor Devlin is here, and Councillor Dorman is here. Councillor Fagan is also here, as is Councillor Faulkner and Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Horsham, I see that you're here. Councillor Logan is here, as is Councillor Loudon, and Councillor MacDonald. Councillor McAdams. Nope, nothing from Councillor McAdams. Councillor McCreary, I see that you're here. I have apologies from Councillor McGuigan. Councillor Horn, can you confirm that you're at the meeting and substituting for Councillor McGuigan?
That's correct. I'm at the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, I see that you're at the meeting, as is Councillor Nealon. Councillor Nelson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ross is in attendance, as is Councillor Shearer, Councillor Wardhall and Councillor Wilson. There are also a number of officers present at today's meeting, and with that, Chair, I'll hand back to you for the business of today's meeting.
Yes. Paul, I don't know if you called out my name at the there. I'd just lost the connection just as you were going to it, Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Anderson,
back in.
I had seen you in the councillors present, so
right, okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper is here as well, Pauline.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to all the colleagues on this morning's executive meeting. We'll start right away by item 1, the declaration of interest. Do we have any declaration of interest? I don't see any hands raised. So we'll go on to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 1st of December, pages 5 to 10. Does any colleague have any items arising from those minutes? Again, I'm seeing no hands, so I'll move the minutes. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 3, the monitoring items. It's a revenue budget monitoring for period 10, 1st of April to 31st of December. This can be found in pages 11 to 30, and I would ask Paul to give us a report on this, please. Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The paper, as you've said, is the revenue budget monitoring. It takes us up to the end of 2021. Now, more importantly, within this report to the Executive Committee, is we do it at this point in every year. What we provide is a probable outturn position. That's our best estimate based on work that's done between November and December of how the council's budget is likely to outturn at the end of the year. So this isn't the final accounts, but it's a good estimate of where this is likely to be at the year end. And there are some things in here that are certain at this point, and when we make that apparent as we go through. What we also look for is approval of transfers to reserves where these are known at this point in time. So what I'll take you to is section 4, which is in page 12 of the papers. And you can see about a third of the way down the page, a table 1, and that gives an analysis of the outturn position after transfers to reserves. And I'll go back and I'll touch on the transfers to reserves as we go through this. And I'm going to focus, when I'm going through this paper, on pages 12 and 13. So what we're looking at in that table is an underspend of £4.794 million. And the elements that make that up are covered in that table. So what I'll do is I'll talk through each of those elements. So first of all, it talks about resources. So you can see in the table that there's a reference there to a figure in brackets, right, which is an overspend of £585,000. So at 4.3 were given the reason for that position, and it relates to social work resources. And it mainly relates to demand for residential and external placements and kinship care within children and family services. So the point is made there again in 4.3, just about transfers to reserves, but that's the main factor that we've got within our resource position, that overspend within social work. So underneath that, you can see an item in relation to loan charges. And the main point that's being made in there in section 4.4 is a reference to decisions that you've taken previously around the Loans Fund review. And you'll remember this is an issue that comes up in our budget papers, and it came up in the members' briefing last week around how we were using this way of treating our debt to create money to assist in the budget strategy. So previously, we've identified through doing this £13.5 million, which would arise in 2021-22, which could be taken to assist in budget strategies. That actually, when that's outturned, it's worked out better, right, by £1.362 million. So we've already got permission to take the £13.5 million to reserves, and I'm looking for permission to take that other £1.3 million. So the next item that's in the table, it says corporate items, right? And we talk about a net underspend of £2.4 million for corporate items. Now, what that relates to, in the main, is money that was within the budget for pay award. And you'll have heard me talk before about when the grant settlement was finally given back last, I think, February or March. The Cabinet Secretary identified a further £2.4 million to go to councils. And you took a decision through the Executive Committee to commit that for pay award. Well, we haven't needed all of that. So I'm recognising that as an underspend that can be taken to reserves. But we absolutely need that in future years in terms of potential pay settlements. The next item in the table, the final item in the table, is council tax. And you can see at 4.7 a description of why we arrive at a £2.9 million over recovery of council tax. So there's a description there about in-year levels of collection have been better from properties, and also we've collected more in arrears. So this is amounts owing from previous years that we've managed to get in. So that takes us to a figure of £2.9 million. So this is where we get to this underspend position of £4.7 million. Now, before I talk about what the paper proposes you do with that, I'd probably guide you to section 6 of the paper, which is on page 13, which talks about transfers to reserves. And that section 6 works in conjunction with Appendix 3, and that's on page 21 of your papers, which goes through in detail proposed transfers to reserves. Now, these split into two groups. And first of all, you can see at 6.1, we talk about resource and corporate items, right, totalling £17.4 million. Now, that's a more usual practice, right, which comes up when we do this paper at this time every year. And what it in the main reflects is the fact that how the council spends money on specific things doesn't always necessarily fall neatly into financial years, and sometimes money's carried forward in respect to things. There are, if you have a look at the appendix, there are a couple of items that are just worth pointing out. One that comes up every year's Pupil Equity Fund, right? And what you're aware, and what I try to remind the committee of every year is, remember, the Pupil Equity Fund money is given out for an academic year, but that doesn't follow into the same timelines as a financial year. So there's an amount of money needs to be carried forward in respect to that. We're also taking forward money in respect of early years, which hasn't been spent, but which we will spend on the early years expansion in the coming years. And also, probably the other standout item in there is on page 22. And you can see an amount against investments, right, of £5.4 million. Now, what that reflects is the profile of the spend of the extra money that the council agreed to put in as investments in February 2021. So not all of that was going to be spent in 2021-22. Some of it was going to be spent next year and a bit in the year after. So that's about carrying that money forward so that that's available for that. So that element's more usual. The bit that's probably different relates to COVID funds, and that's the other figure that's picked up in 6.1. So there's £18.681 million that would be carried forward into year 2023 in respect of COVID funding. So again, you can see Appendix 3 on page 21 of your papers. So there is another table that summarises the position in a bit more detail and splits apart those COVID and non-COVID monies. But it comes back at the bottom right-hand corner to that underspent position after transfers to reserves of £4.794 million. Now, at the foot of page 13, what the paper is proposing is that 4.794 is transferred to reserves and carried forward to meet the cost of COVID recovery moving forward. So the point's made in the paper that we don't anticipate any additional funding for the costs of COVID from the Scottish Government in 22-23, but we still expect to have costs that will carry on into next year. And the intention in making that contribution to the reserve would be that those monies assist in managing the costs. So if I can take you back to the recommendations, right, at 2.1 on page 11, looking for noting, right, of that £4.794 million. I'll come back to that in a second. It looks for approval of the total transfer of reserves detailed in Appendix 3, and that the total figures given there of £36 million. It looks for approval that 4.794 million be transferred to reserves to manage the cost of COVID recovery next year. And it also looks for approval on item 4 there, and this relates to the IJB, and that's about carrying forward an underspend within social work, which is monies related to the IJB, but will still appear in our books to be held in the council's balance sheet for the IJB's use next year. So those are the recommendations, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Does any colleague have any questions? Jerry, I see your hands up first.
Thanks, Chair. Paul, just maybe to clarify for my ignorance here, where's Appendix 1? Just know in the paper. Another question on 4.3, you state there's a combined overspend of 585 million for social work, and then further down you say the underspend. So is it an overspend or is it an underspend? Because at the top you've got it as an overspend, and underneath 4 lines down you've got an underspend. Could we have some clarity with that, and where's Appendix 1?
Right, okay. On Appendix 1, see my copy of the papers, it starts on page 16.
Yeah.
Right, so that's Appendix 1.
But that's a table, that's no an appendix.
Councillor Convery, listen, I'll get a fresh set of papers emailed to you. See, on page 16, in the version,
yes,
right, there is a page headed up Appendix 1, which isn't a table. It goes through a number of items, 1.1, I think, through to about 1.15. Sorry, in fact, it goes through to 1.115. Then there's a section 2. There is a table on that first page, but there is an Appendix 1 that extends to beyond just the table. I think maybe you've not got it in your pack.
It's not there. You're right, it's not there.
Okay.
So we're getting asked to vote on things which are not in the papers. I mean,
that's it.
Councillor Convery, in the online version which I've taken this from, it's there.
Sorry, Paul, I'm going by papers that have been issued to me as a councillor to make decisions on. It's not in the papers.
Can I possibly ask if anybody else is in the same position here? It's in my papers, starting at page 16.
Yeah, I'm the same, Chair.
I've got it as well.
Me too.
I'm okay, Chair.
Yep,
Yep,
I have
okay.
it too.
Yeah, fine, Chair.
I've got it.
Fine, Chair.
I'm not sure why it's been missed off yours, Jerry, but certainly you can be expected to do some of that appendix. Could anyone possibly send Jerry an electronic copy just now so that he could see that?
Yes, Chair, we're arranging for that to happen at the
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Can I ask Jerry whether you have any other comments just now, and we'll come back to you on.
No, it's
that
just
item.
it's just a clarification. If Paul can give us about 4.3, it states that it's an overspend of 585, and then underneath that, the overspend becomes an underspend. What is it?
Okay, right. So what's in there, Councillor Condry, right, is a mixture, right, of references to figures that are within the control of the IGB and how they work into social work figures. What I can provide you with is a table which shows how that fits together and gives a relative position for children and family services, for social work as a whole, and for the element that's been carried forward in relation to the services that relate to the IGB. Right?
Well, aye, with all due respect, it's not been flippant. If we don't have all the information in front of us, I mean, you've gave us a whole plethora of figures, and that's great. That's your job. But at the end of the day, anybody looking at that, 1 minute it's an overspend, next minute it's an underspend. There's got to be text there to tell us how we came about with that. That's the way I look at life.
With all due respect, Jerry, this is why Paul's here. He tries to put it in as succinctly as possible on paper, but he's here to answer colleagues' questions. And I think that's what he's trying to do just now, is answer your question.
And I'm not disputing that, Chair. I'm not disputing anything you've said there. Just asking for clarity. That's all.
Okay.
Thanks, Jerry.
I apologise if it's not phrased as clearly as it should be. See the relevant part of this, right, which we're picking up in that table in the cover. In terms of the overall position for resources, it is an overspend, right, of £585,000, right, and the main part of that relates to children and family services within social work. The point I'm making, Councillor Condry, and I think that this is where, and it's my error, I'm losing you, right, is just around how the different parts of social work fit together now that we've got the IGB. But from the perspective of the bit that's relevant in that table, that's an overspend.
Okay. We'll go on to someone else's now, Jerry, till you get the appendix through. Okay. Robert.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I find it in following through the net result of all this. Can Paul tell us what the difference is between the budget strategy and the amount of money that's going to reserves here? In other words, the £4 million plus is being used for COVID. There's another figure that's going, a much bigger figure that's going towards the reserves generally. How much of that is, if you like, is additional to what we had in the budget strategy to start with? In other words, how much more money is there to play about with in that context, if you like?
Right. So, and answering your question, Councillor Brown, the bottom line figure, right, which is different, which I'm asking the committee to take a decision on, is that figure of £4.794 million.
Right.
Right. That's the extent to which this is better than we anticipated when we put together the various elements of the budget. And I do understand there's a whole number of complicated moving parts in here, but it's that bit.
Right. Okay. Could I ask a couple of other more detailed things? Cleaning costs for schools I mentioned at 1.338 million on page 26. Is that likely to be an ongoing permanent figure, if you like, in the future, or is the extra cleaning cost beginning to be absorbed into routine activities, if you like, in the school? Secondly, in terms of the extra funding caused by COVID, or extra funding problems, how does South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture fit into that? Is there a separate figure? Is all that within its own budget, so to speak? And finally, are we taking account of adequate provision for employment tribunal settlements, which I think is an issue now in terms of the figures for this year's budget.
Okay, I'll go through them hopefully in order. So in terms of the cleaning costs within schools, what we need to remember is that the figures that we're looking at are for 2021-22. So this is the year that's gone by, which is obviously one that's been significantly disrupted by the pandemic, right? And we've had different cleaning regimes in place. So that reflects the costs that have applied across the year that we've just had. Moving forward, right, I can't answer in detail how cleaning regimes are going to change, but I think it's safe to assume that there'll be a degree of enhanced cleaning for a period of time that's likely to step down as time goes by and hopefully the pandemic eases. Right? But committing to a step down from that in financial terms isn't something I could do at this point. I think we need to be aware that that might be an issue moving ahead in future years. The other aspect that we've picked up is just around, you talked about South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture in terms of lost income, right? And again, one of the things that we have factored in is an additional anticipated contribution to SLLC to reflect how their income, right, has been affected by the pandemic. So that's catered for within what we've got here. Right. The question around employment tribunals is a matter for SLLC. Right. To the best of my knowledge, the Trust Board hasn't been briefed on this at this point, and it's not appropriate for me to comment any further on it, Councillor Brown.
Thanks very much, Paul. Anything else, Robert? No?
Well, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Right, chap. Alec?
Thanks, Chair. It was actually just further clarity on Robert's first point. The 17.405 million that we had previously transferred to reserves, how much of that is unallocated or going to respond to budget pressures, and how much is allocated? Sorry, I know it's been through before, but it's as we get towards the end of the year, it's just to get clarity.
Okay, so you're just picking up a couple of points there, Councillor Allison. So you're giving me the figure of 17.4. So I'm taking that to be the figure that's in there at 6.1.
Correct.
Right, so right, okay, so that's a transfers to reserves. Now, all of that is committed to the purposes that are identified in Appendix 3. So I can't tell you that changes the budget position for year 2022-23. These things are all being committed for specific purposes.
You okay, Alex?
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. I'm just looking at it. I didn't realise the link there. Right. Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much. Monique?
Hi, Chair. Paul, it was to go back to Robert's question to do with South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. I don't think it's good enough just to say that basically, like, because it's not been discussed with the board, that it means that we're not going to discuss it or it's not going to get highlighted. The fact is, it has been published, the findings of the Employment Tribunal, and for us as councillors, we basically give, I think it's like 23 million out our budget to South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture for it to function. Therefore, if it's going to have money that's going to have to pay out in the sum of millions, then I think that it would be very offhand for it not to be mentioned here in this paper and for it just to be shoved and kicked into the long grass. And I think that that would be very wrong of us. So I think that you need to be more specific to give us as elected members our place, especially for the fact that it's budget time.
Thanks very much, Monique. But no, it's not for this. It's not for this committee. I think Paul was quite right in saying that this has to go to SLLC and it needs to be put before the board before it ever comes back here. Councillors here will get the opportune time to have a look at it. But this committee today is not going to discuss it. It's not an item for discussion. And from my point of view, that's the end of the matter as far as I'm concerned for today. It will be discussed at some future time. Councillors will get a chance to have a look at this, but this is not the forum today to look at that. Thanks very much.
Chair.
Yes.
So in your position as council leader, you're basically saying that you're not willing for it to be discussed today?
Yes. It's not for this forum. It will be discussed. I'm not stopping discussion on it. This is not the point. It's got to be put in front of SLLC board first, and then it will come back for discussion in the councillor situation, but certainly not at this meeting today. I'll bring Cleland in at this point. Cleland.
Chair, could I just remind all members this relates to an individual employee of another organisation. It is a public meeting. This is not the appropriate forum to discuss the specifics around a particular employee of another organisation. This is, if there was to be an ask of the council, we would need to set up an appropriate session for councillors to discuss it, not an open forum. This person's personal details should not be discussed today.
Thank you very much.
Chair, could I just say then, in response to Cleland, I think that that's something we should organise then, please, and it would be very much appreciated. And I would just basically mention that I didn't mention anybody's names, and it is public record, and basically MD can Google it and find it out, but I haven't actually said anybody's names.
I've not implied that. What I'm saying to you is this is another organisation's former employee. That organisation needs to consider any matters arising from the judgment. And if there is a role for council, then it would be referred by that organisation. But at this point in time, it's not for South Lanarkshire Council to publicly debate the outcome of a tribunal relating to a former employee of another organisation. So, Chair, just your original position, hopefully that clarifies it, but this committee needs to move on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ian Harrow.
Thanks very much. Could I just go back to the point that Jerry made earlier? In point 4.3 in line 2, it does say an overspend of 0.585, and yet in line 6 it says an underspend of 0.585, which includes a commitment of 4.895. How does a commitment of 4.895 make an underspend into make an overspend into an underspend? I think Jerry had a point, to be honest. Is that just a typo?
No. Paul, if you want to come back in and try and explain the IJB situation a wee bit clearer.
Councillor Harrow, I wasn't suggesting for a minute Councillor Convery didn't have a point, right? Where I'm, if I can just explain, see at this point about a commitment of 4.985, right, in relation to the integrated joint board. And there's also in the recommendations, it talks about a transfer to reserves, right, in respect of money that sits within the orbit of the integrated joint board. But see this point around a commitment, that's about the fact that we're going to have to take money, which the IJB, to be fair, were given pretty late in the year, in which they had issues spending during 2021-22. So that amount of money, that contribution to reserves is reflected in the overall position. That's all that paragraph's saying. Right, so Councillor Convery does have a point. The paragraph isn't that clear in how these different elements link in together. It is complicated. The point I would go back to, right, is that as I was getting across to Councillor Convery, was at the core of this, the resource overspend that we do have, the bit that's reflected in that table relates to children and family services, right, to the extent of £585,000. And the reasons for that are given in there. So what we'll get is a short note that just takes you through that and identifies the elements that relate to social work overall, the IJB, this commitment, their transfer to reserves and children and family services, just so this is absolutely plain.
Can I just come back, Chair, please?
Yes, Ian, yeah.
Thanks. In future, could it maybe be made clearer for members because probably few of us actually have any kind of financial training. And for these numbers to jump about from over to underspend and a lot of meaning behind it. I know you do explanations well, Paul, but it's just this bit just seemed to be confusing. Thanks very much.
Councillor Harwood, your point is not lost on me, right? And I'll address that moving forward, okay?
Thanks very much. Jerry, have you had a chance to look at Appendix 1? Is there anything you want to raise on it now?
No, nothing I want to raise. I did send you an email, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I can't see any other hands raised at this point, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. If we could then move on to item 4, which is the capital programme. It's on pages 31 to 40, and I would ask Paul to give a report on this, please.
Okay, so this is a report. This is for the capital programme. It's for the same period. It takes us up to the end of the year. Within the paper at 4.1, it suggests that we have a revised programme of £72.4 million. And what that would reflect would be a net decrease of nearly £5.9 million of projects. And those are reflected in Appendix 1. Now, Appendix 1 is in your papers at page 34. Now, there is a point made at the head of that appendix, which is that throughout the year, we have said we need to keep an eye on the extent to which the programme remains deliverable across the period of the year. So you can see that in those 2 paragraphs at the top of the page. And the point that's being made there is that we have had issues around things like supply chain for specific projects across the year, which have impacted in timescales. And this continues, and it's reflected in this appendix. So what you will see are a number of items in there. There are some higher value items, probably beginning on page 35, where we have a couple of things above a value of £500,000. And then on to page 36, you can see some of the higher value items in there. And in the main, these are slipping because of timescales, but they are being incorporated in the draft 2022-23 programme that has been discussed with the Budget Working Group. So they're not being lost in that respect. So what that does do, though, is reduce the value of the programme by nearly £5.9 million in year 21-22. So the rest of the paper notes the position. It also notes the position on the housing capital programme, which again is of a significant value in year 2021-22 and what we've spent to date. In terms of recommendations, it's looking for noting of that position, Chair, and approval of those adjustments to the programme which are in the appendix. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Does any colleague have any questions of Paul? Robert?
Yeah, just a quick question. Maybe there's not an easy answer to it. I mean, there's mention made, as we've had in previous reports, about the problems of material shortages and more particularly price increases. And I wondered if we had any kind of overall view about, is that a kind of a 5% increase on our overall costs across the board or some such thing, just to give a kind of vague feeling of it, because manifestly we're going to get less value for our money against this sort of background. It'd be just helpful to have an idea of the kind of dimension of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Paul?
So in terms of managing the capital programme through 21-22 and into 22-23, we've been working with officers to manage projects on an individual basis. Right, so part of the output of that you've seen in these reports where it's become apparent that supply chains in terms of timescale have extended. Right, in certain cases we've had pressure in prices as well, but the main impact that you've seen at this point has been around the length of time that it's taken to do things. Right, so moving forward, again, I'll work with the teams within roads and within housing to look at projects on a case-by-case basis. At this point, I don't think we're in a position, because sometimes it can be dependent on the commodity that is being used, for example, in a particular project. I don't think we're in a position to say there is an overall blanket increase that could be applied to these things, Councillor Brown.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Alec, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, Appendix 1, what Paul has talked about. It's very good to see under Roads and Structures the Pontfrey Bridge, after many years of splitting a community, has managed to be rebuilt and opened for use. But as part of this, the council actually allocated 6 million for 2 bridges. And I would like to hear confirmation that the 1.591 comes off the 6 million that we allocated, if you like, or off the cost of the Pontfrey Bridge, leaving, my understanding, 5 million still available for the Clyde Bridge. And bearing in mind the changes to these, if we can actually look at ways of ensuring that after 4 years of splitting another community, which is costing many locals significantly. I was given one figure by someone who has a shop on one side of the Clyde and lives on the other. His annual costs are £5,000 extra to be able to access his business. And I think it is important that we make sure that that funding that has been saved in Pontfrey through the government grant goes to the Clyde Bridge, and that we today should be recommending that that fund is adapted to ensure that the Clyde Bridge can be completed in the next financial year.
Paul, can you come back on that?
Okay, so what the adjustment that's in there at present is doing, Councillor Allison, is recognising the fact that we've got this specific grant for that bridge. Now, in order to use that from the government, I need to replace the funding that was there previously for the bridge with that grant from the government, because that needs to be spent this year. That's a condition of that. Right, so in terms of what has happened, right, with the money freed up, that has moved on into year 2023, 22-23's draft programme. And in the draft programme that we've got, it sits against a line which is described as road structures, right, which is normally used for bridges. So that the funding freed up has not been lost, right, or lost to roads or even bridges. That's where it's identified in the year that we've got ahead. What this doesn't do, though, I think, is net down the cost of the Pontfrey Bridge. Right, so what the council's previously agreed to do is to spend an amount of money on a bridge. This doesn't change what's been spent, it just changes the funding package in the way that I've described, and I have to recognise that in order to utilise the money. So there's maybe two different issues in there, but if I can give reassurance that the money which is created through receipt of this isn't lost.
I fully understand what you're saying, but it does not address the point I was trying to make, is that this funding that has been released needs to be ring-fenced for the Clyde Bridge to ensure that the overall budget for these two is increased. And I think I would like to put a recommendation forward, additional recommendation here, that we today would wish that that budget be sufficiently managed to allow the bridge to be started and completed in the next financial year.
I'm not sure, Alec, whether that's in order. I mean, we've already stated as a council that this bridge will be built, and I think officers are looking at a range of options to make sure that that carries forward. So I'm not sure that what you're proposing isn't actually in order for today. We can't really commit to things if we haven't looked into just how viable those things are. We have gave a commitment that the bridge will be completed, but we need to look at the options and the best way to achieve that, both for the council pound and for local residents as well. So I think you're a wee bit premature in asking for that.
No, I disagree with you, John. This bridge has been shut now for 4 years. It was 2018 when it first went. And I think it's perfectly proper, as we do with other underspends, to identify what they are used for. And therefore, I would suggest that this 1.5 million is ring-fenced to add to the budget for Clyde Bridge. And that will be a political decision, not a, all due respect to the officers, an officer's decision as to whether it goes ahead. And we have been informed as local members that it's not going ahead at this time because you believe that it is too expensive. That is a political decision, and if the decision is not taken here today to decide this, when is it going to be taken? Because it should not be delayed at this time. Prices are continually going up. There was some suggestion that if we held off, they would come down. Well, since the contracts quotes came in, price of steel has gone up by another £50 a tonne. It's very unlikely. Might not happen, but it's very unlikely that prices are going to drop. And we need to take a political decision, a commitment for the council to keep its word, and that this will be done now as quick as possible. 4 years is far too long to wait.
Chair, if I can come in for a second, I fully appreciate what Councillor Allison's saying in terms of this being a political decision. From my own perspective, it's one I would be more comfortable with members taking if you were informed by a paper on it. Right. So at the moment, there isn't any reference in this document to the project that Councillor Allison's talking about in terms of funding. My preference would be that any decision taken by members is informed by a report from officers on that topic. Thanks, Chair.
Alec, can I ask that what Paul is asking for there is something brought forward with different options on it that can be considered? We're not moving the goalposts here. What we're trying to say is let's look at the best way forward here. So if Paul brings forward a paper on this that we can all discuss, I think that would be the best way forward. Would that be acceptable to you?
I think you need to look at timescales, John.
Very quickly.
I'm not sure that even to the next executive meeting, that's still a delay of a month, of yet another month. I think we can commit today to the funding that has been freed up because of a Scottish Government grant, can certainly be added to that budget, and it makes it far more viable and a much smaller, excuse the pun, bridge to gap to bridge in financial terms. So it needs to be done with
Paul,
haste,
how quickly can we get this report, Paul?
Chair, it's okay maybe just to put some, just to try and bridge the conversation to some extent. I'll just extend that analogy. If committee today agreed to ring fence that 1.591 million to the Clyde Bridge project, that's distinct from the other part of what Councillor Allison was saying. There is a live tender discussion ongoing at the moment, so I don't want to get into figures, but even with the addition of that, as Councillor Allison knows, that doesn't bridge the full gap that would allow the second part of what he's asking to go forward, which is for the council to let the contract and for it to be complete within the year. So if this committee was minded to agree that ring fencing, I would still go back to Paul's suggestion that a full paper's brought back to committee, because we've still got a gap to bridge and there would be decisions for members to take around that. So is it possible just to separate the two bits that Councillor Allison's talking about, because the first is in your gift, the second one isn't necessarily in your gift at the moment?
Would you be agreeable to that, Alec?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, providing that's at the next executive meeting, which I think is the beginning of March. Is that right, Clallan?
Yeah.
I mean, so there will be a decision on Clyde Bridge can be taken at that meeting.
Right, I propose that we enter that into the recommendations then, and when we come to ask, when we ask for the recommendation to be approved, members can say whether they agree or not. Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I've got a good deal of sympathy with what Alec's saying. Obviously, it's in his ward. He's, we as a council have committed to build a bridge, and it hasn't been built so far. There's been lots of reasons why they're out with council control for that. But I have to take exception to any member grabbing capital out of the capital budget for their project when everybody is in the same boat and everybody's looking for capital projects in their ward. So, you know, there has to be some equilibrium within this. And I would suggest that a paper coming to the committee based on the costs, because it can't be at any price. You just don't have the flexibility or the money as a council to do it at any price. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question on the paper that will be coming back. Would that be appropriate for that paper to go to the full council rather than the executive, given that some of the members within those wards will not be sitting at the executive and may look for an input? And would it be preferable for that to come to a full council meeting? That would be, I would like to see, rather than going to the executive.
Not really sure how members would feel about that. It's actually a decision for the executive committee, which would then go into the council. So I don't really see the need for that, Richard. There's quite a few of the members here that are taking up the case locally. So I'm really not sure whether that's a necessary way forward.
I'm just thinking, Chair, sorry, just for coming back in. Obviously, I've got councillors who don't sit at the executive and or look at us to take that point forward. So they therefore may ask me to take forward a full motion to the council, which they are more than entitled to do. So then that becomes a bit more trickier. So I'm just trying to play the long game here and get the answer. So that's why I'm saying, do they then take the motion to full council? Because then you have to hear it.
I'll bring in Geraldine first to give us some indication. Geraldine.
Thank you, Chair. As has been suggested before, if this would mean additional funding having to be applied to the capital programme for next year, then the capital programme is decided by the council at its meeting. The executive committee could endorse something, but ultimately the decision would lie with the council if it requires additional funding to be committed.
Thanks very much, Geraldine. There's your answer, Richard. It would go to the exec, but it would come to the full council. Okay. Margaret, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I take on board everything that Alex saying and about the timescale that they've been waiting on the bridge repairs to be made. But as you quite rightly pointed out, there's everybody in the room will have capital projects they want taken forward in their ward. We've been negotiating for 7 years for a new cemetery provision in Straven because the old provision has run out, and that needs some capital funding. Richard has been on regularly speaking about the sports centre in Larkhall. There's a whole list of capital projects that I would like to see money getting signed up for the new cemetery provision. The capital works that need done to the road to transform it, to make it feasible for the purchase of the field that's there and has been test bored and approved as the right place for it. So I don't know if I agree with us ring fencing money for particular capital projects until the whole budget process has been settled. I mean, Alex been given guarantees that his bridges are going to be repaired. I haven't been given any guarantee that I'm getting a new cemetery in the ward, and there'll be other people sitting there that have got similar issues in their own wards. Richard's got the confidence that he's getting a feasibility study done on the sports centre. So I think the decision lies with the full council, and it's at the end of us achieving an approved proposed capital budget for 22-23.
Thanks very much, Margaret. It would appear from the feedback that we're getting at this present time that probably wouldn't be acceptable to members to ring fence at 1.5 million, Alec, but certainly the idea of a paper coming forward about the options available is something that we probably would be agreeable to. So I think we'll proceed on that basis. You want to come back in, Alec?
Yeah, well, there's 2 points. First of all, it's not simply being raised because it's in my ward. It's an issue that covers a great deal further, and it is about one of the things it is about is the council keeping its word, and simply stretching this into further years is not acceptable, whether you live in the ward or not. And by ring fencing these funds, it's something we have done in the past frequently when a budget is underspent, and it's not transferring funds or committing anything else. It is simply making sure that funds that were promised to be used for a bridge that haven't yet been spent stay ring fenced for that project. And I am therefore putting forward the recommendation, and I'll adapt it the way Cleland has suggested, and simply leave it at the 1.5 somewhere, £9 million is ring fenced for.
Is someone speaking in the background?
It's not me.
Right, okay. Are you putting that forward as an amendment, Alec?
Yes.
Right. I'll bring in, I think we'll get David Shearer and Peter Craig first. Sorry, have you got somebody to second that, Alec?
Yeah, I think, Richard, would you get a second it?
Yeah, I'll second that, yeah.
Thanks very much. David Shearer. David.
Thanks, Chair. My understanding from what Paul has told us today is that money is already in the roads budget to be spent on bridges. It's not being lost. It's not being transferred. It's already there in the budget. Alex asking for it to be committed to the Clyde Bridge, which I don't have an issue with, but if it's already there in the roads budget and is likely to be spent on bridges, or that's what it's intended for, I don't see what Alex driving at. There's a commitment there to get this bridge repaired. That money is not going to cover the full amount, and a decision will have to be taken on that later. But that money is already there, and it's going to be spent on bridges. So Alec, I don't honestly see what you're driving at, Paul.
Okay. Peter.
Yeah, much in the same vein as David, I'd like an explanation, a clearer explanation on what exactly it is that Alec's asking for. Obviously not from Alec, but from the officers.
So, Chair, I think what Councillor Allison has suggested is agreement to the recommendations that's in the paper, items 1 to 3, but with a further amendment to specifically ring fence the £1.591 million freed up by the external grant for committing against the Clyde Bridge, as opposed to, as Paul has indicated, that money is freed up but remains in a roads infrastructure line, which largely is spent on bridges. So it's a specific reference to the Clyde Bridge that funding is ring-fenced to that particular project, and a paper will then come forward by officers to the March Executive Committee. So I think that's the amendment. But Councillor Allison might want to confirm my understanding and also confirm whether the suggestions by Councillor Shearer and Councillors Craig that actually it has the same effect by being in that roads infrastructure line means that his amendment's not required. But that's down to Councillor Allison. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you very much.
If I could just come back on that. I get that, and I get the fact that it wouldn't have a huge effect on the capital budget, but it's still something which I think, as all councillors, we need to take in the round. And I would presume that money would be being spent mostly or all on the bridge, but it's something from a capital budget point of view that should be discussed with all councillors in the round in the capital budget programme, rather than a specific item at a executive meeting. Thanks.
Just to confirm what Cleland said was our intention. The further point is it therefore ensures that the Council's commitment of £6 million between the two budgets that they would finance would remain £6 million. with an addition then of this extra funding. Because if it is not ring-fenced, it actually reduces the funding that the council has produced from 6 to 4.5 million.
No. Right, Alex. So if you're intending going ahead with it, then it's a case of moving the paper recommendations against your amendment. So from my point of view, I'm going to move the papers, the recommendations in the papers. Okay, and Pauline, you need to sort it out then in a vote against the paper and the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking that you have a seconder for the motion.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. So if you're happy for me to take the vote, Chair, the motion is the recommendation is detailed in the report, and the amendment is as specified by Chief Executive and clarified by Councillor Allison in relation to the £1.591 million ring-fenced and a sum of £6 million to remain for the two bridges, and also a further report to be taken to the Executive Committee. Can I just check that that's the position?
Correct.
Thank you. In that case, I'll ask you to vote by indicating whether your preference is for the motion, the amendment, or if you wish to abstain. So I'll take it alphabetically then. Councillor Allison.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bradley.
Motion.
Councillor Brown.
Motion.
Councillor Chalmers.
Motion.
Councillor Convery.
Motion.
Councillor Cooper.
Motion.
Councillor Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Devlin.
Motion.
Councillor Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Fagan.
Motion.
Councillor Faulkner.
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton.
Motion.
Councillor Harrow.
Amendment.
Councillor Horn.
Motion.
Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Logan.
Motion.
Councillor Loudon.
Motion, thanks.
Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor McAdams.
Motion.
Councillor McCreary.
Amendment.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Nealon.
Amendment.
Councillor Nelson.
Amendment.
Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Wardhaw.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Just checking that there's no one who I've missed out. Okay, I'll just count up the votes. Thank you. I make that 23 for the motion and 4 for the amendment. The motion is declared carried.
Thanks very much, colleagues. We now move on to item 5, which is additional funding from the Scottish Government and other external sources on pages 41 to 44. And I can ask Paul to give us a report on this, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's a straightforward report. On page 43, what you can see is a list of the additional revenue funding which has appeared since the last time we reported to the Executive Committee before Christmas. That's totalling just under £16 million pounds, or £15.6 million. You can see the more significant amounts in there. Amounts for business support hospitality payments. There's an amount for teachers induction, which is a pretty routine amount that comes through. And you also see a number of amounts in relation to health and social care for winter pressures and for living wage. So that's that's the revenue funding on page 43. The capital funding is on page 44. It totals just over £1 million. So you've got money from the UK Community Renewal Fund, Elevator, Business Support, getting £875,000 in the current year. And there's also money for Regeneration Capital Growth Fund for Abington at £200,000. So that's additional money coming through there. So capital money just over £1 million, revenue money just over £15.5 million. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul. It's really nice to see Elevator getting the community's money there. That will they're doing a very good job just now on Business Gateway. So the idea that they've got this additional funding will really help us going forward to create more business throughout South Lanarkshire. Really nice. Does any colleague have any questions on this item? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'll move the recommendations.
Yes, I've put it in the chat.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 8, recommendations referred from the Housing and Technical Resources. This is on pages 45 to 50, and I would ask Danny Lowe to give us a report on this, please.
Thanks for that, Chair. So this report consists of 2 referrals that have been made from the Housing and Technical Resources Committee recently. And the first of these relates to the updated antisocial behaviour policy, which was considered and endorsed by the Housing and Technical Resources Committee on the 8th of December 2021. And this supersedes the previous version that's been in place and was approved in 2013. When we were reviewing the policy, we knew that there was a key focus to ensure compliance with the updated legislation and regulatory requirements. And in doing that as well, we needed to ensure that appropriate framework was in place for the council to respond to antisocial behaviour. So in doing that, we completely understand the detrimental impact that antisocial behaviour can have on both individuals and communities that it's occurring in, and we recognise that we need to get the best results from that. And to do that, council services need to work closely with partners and other agencies to tackle the antisocial behaviour, its underlying causes, and to support victims. So what we also know is that the policy in itself won't resolve all antisocial behaviour, but it does provide a framework for how council services will respond to it collaboratively with community safety partners and local communities. The report in front of members this morning highlights that the draft policy was issued for consultation between 23rd of August and the 22nd of October last year, when it was published in the council's website alongside an online questionnaire. And in addition to this, it was also arranged consultation events and presentations, including an elected members awareness session on the 4th of October 2021. As part of the policy development, we also engaged in a peer review with Fife and East Ayrshire councils. And if approved by committee today, the policy will be implemented on the 1st of March. The second recommendation in the report relates to the Housing Revenue and Capital Account Budget for 2022-23, and that was considered and endorsed at a Special Housing and Technical Resources Committee on the 19th of January 2022. At this meeting, members were advised that council officers had been working closely with the Tenants Budget Scrutiny Group over the final few months of 2021 to develop a set of proposals in respect to the proposed rent rise for the year ahead and also in the investment priorities. The proposals that have been put forward for 2022-23 have been prepared in line with the 30-year business plan, and this ensures that we remain in a stable financial footing going forward, whilst meeting our service delivery and investment requirements, and most importantly, and at the same time, keeping rents affordable for our tenants. So the report to committee highlighted that due to the ongoing uncertainty caused by the COVID pandemic, which was the same position we were in last year, obviously, tenants were again supportive of moving away from the established multi-year approach and instead worked to a one-year increase of 2.2% again, which is the same as last year. And that continues to acknowledge the financial uncertainty which is facing tenants at this time. The proposed investment priorities for the year ahead continued on a similar theme to the previous years, and details were provided to members on a proposed £52.23 million capital programme. Members were also advised of the consultation that had taken place around the budget and rent setting process and the positive feedback and support from both the Budget Scrutiny Group and the Tenants Participation Coordination Group on the 2.2% one-year increase proposed, and that was considered to provide good value for money for the tenants whilst allowing continued investment to be made. And it was stated at the closing event by the Budget Scrutiny Group, the proposed increase of 2.2% is fair and it ensures that rents remain affordable for most tenants. If I take members back to the recommendations in section 2 of the report, that is that the revised antisocial behaviour policy is approved for implementation on the 1st of March 2022 and that the proposed rent increase of 2.2% is endorsed, and the proposed capital programme for 2022-23 totaling £52.23 million is endorsed, and that these are referred now to the Council for approval. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Danny. Does any colleague have any questions on Danny's report? Not seeing any hands up, so I'll move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 7, Jackton Primary School full business case for the Glasgow Side region. It's on pages 51 to 58, and I would ask Pauline to give a report on this. Pauline Elliott. Pauline.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Members, I'm really pleased to bring you this good news story today as it sets out the process and funding package to deliver a brand new primary school for East Kilbride to serve the new community growth area. The report asks you to approve the full business case, the final step in the City Deal approval process, with strategic and outline approvals already in place. And a copy of the full business case is appended to your report. Members, as you know, the East Kilbride Community Growth Area is a key South Lanarkshire City Deal project, one of 4 community growth areas in our council area. Section 3.4 of your report explains that over a period of around 12 years, up to 2,600 new homes will be constructed on the site, 25% of them affordable homes, together with transport and community infrastructure. This includes the provision of the new school, which Section 4 explains contains 17 mainstream classrooms, additional special needs classrooms, nursery provision, and a 7-a-side floodlit pitch, which will also be available for the wider community. Councillors, the report explains in Section 4.3 that the tender timeframe for the school has slipped due to the pandemic, because that also impacted on the delivery of the housing and infrastructure on site. A need for clarity about the build programme was sought to be confident about progress and funding. This has now been achieved and detailed in the report before you today. Section 4.7 of your report explains that approval of the full business case will enable work to begin with the target opening date of the school of August 2023. Member, Section 6 sets out the financial implications of building the school. And you'll see that in Section 6.2, City Deal will fund over 10 million, with the balance being provided by developers' contributions via the Section 75 agreement, which was signed when the application achieved planning permission. As the developer contributions are paid annually in arrears, it will be necessary for the council to borrow to fill the funding gap between the school being built and the contributions being received. The costs of this borrowing are set out in Section 6.4. Members, clearly the borrowing involves an element of risk in case the contributions are not subsequently received. However, given the interest in the site, the fact that 6 developers are actively building and starting to market houses on the site, the risk to the council is considered low. Therefore, I would ask members to approve the recommendations in Section 2 of your report, to approve the full business case, seek City Deal funding and agree to forward fund the project prior to the receipt of developers' contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline, for that very welcome report. It really is. I'm looking forward to taking that to the Glasgow City Cabinet, and I'm sure they will give us the approval we need to get on with this valuable project to East Kilbride. So I see that Monique has her hand up. Monique?
Hi, Chair. Thanks. Pauline, thanks very much for the paper. It's one that I warmly welcome coming forward, and I know that there's been a lot of work that's had to be done in the background. There's been a lot of constraints because of COVID, and I know that your department has been hit, and I take that into account. I just wanted to ask a question. I know that the goalposts have moved a couple of times just basically because of COVID and because obviously you're dealing with multiple developers. At one point, for the building of Jackton School, it was going to be built in 3 stages. Is that now the case, or is it now going to be a simple case of when it's built? Because you were helpful the other day, which I greatly appreciated, when I had asked you the question when it was now scheduled to open, and you said August 23, like obviously all going well. I take it for the August 23 opening, it means that the project in its entirety will now be opening, and it won't just be the school or the nursery first, it will be the full build. Could you just confirm that, please?
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I might need additional support from my education colleagues in the meeting, but the school has now been built as a single phase, Councillor McAdams. We were looking at different phasing plans for the school, but now it has been decided that a single phase is the most cost-effective way to proceed.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Pauline. It's very helpful.
Pauline, I've just been reminded that we've been going for over an hour now, and really we do need that comfort break. I'm not sure if we can wait to the end of this item and then take it.
Chair, I think it's your discretion. So if you want to wait till the end of the item, that's.
No, I think we'll just take it just now, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. So it's 15:15 just now. We resume at 20 past.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Wardhaw was next with his hand up. Jim?
Yeah, it was on page 52. It says a 7-a-side floodlit football pitch which can be utilised by the community lets outside school hours. Now, some of you will remember going back to when we embarked on the primary school modernisation scheme, that council policy at that time that was adopted was because of the value of these assets, that as much community use as possible should be made of them. And the policy of the council adopted at that time was that the sports facilities within the schools, the mugger pitches, the 3G pitches, would be available for free use by the community outside school hours. Now, that particular policy doesn't seem to be being held up here because this is a paid community lets for a pitch, whereas the policy of the council and all the other primary schools was free use by the community outside school hours. And I won't be the only councillor who had battles over the years with head teachers who said it's my mugger pitch or it's my 3G pitch and nobody else is using it. But the spirit of the policy of the council was that it should be free for community use outside school hours.
Thanks, Jim. Can we get someone give us clarity on that item, please?
Chair, I think somebody from education.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll let Lynn take this.
Hi, morning. It's Lynn Sherry here. Just to say, yeah, you're right. We have a general policy that says that Muga pitches, if they're accessible, should be opened up and available, within the site of the school, if they're easily accessible, opened up and available for informal use. And that's what we try to do. Sometimes councillors comment there about the battle with head teachers and pitches open and closed can be due to sort of local aspects of vandalisms, and we can have aspects of closure and opening. But yes, we do, I take your point, we do try and have everything open as much as we can for informal use. But I understand in terms of this community and considering what facilities it would have, it was felt that there would be a benefit of having wider use, and to break that down into an element of informal and then an element of something which would be more formal and allow for the wider community to have access to. So we will have access for a period of time, and then it will switch over to being wider community access for the rest of the residents around the area. That's the way we've arranged this now. So there will be a mix. Our youngsters will still get on for periods of time. I can clarify, we can get information, maybe clarifies exactly what that time frame kind of is, over holidays, over night times, over weekends, if that would help.
Yeah, could that be made available to all the local councillors so that everybody is aware of the full situation there?
Yep. Sorry, I'm realising my camera's on. Yes, I'll do that for you. I'll get that.
Is that okay, Jim?
Yeah, I would like clarification. Yeah, that would do fine. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Katie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think clarification around that would be helpful for all of us. That's great. I just wanted to pick up on one thing which Lynn had said there, and recognise what she says about vandalism and so on. It's certainly a problem which we've experienced in my ward, and it's really very depressing when you provided a facility which the community can use. And we've had instances where children going to school the next day haven't been able to use school facilities because they've been covered in broken glass and so on. So I'd just like to thank Lynn and the team for all of the work they do trying to get that balance right and make sure things are sort of cleaned up properly, and that we try and have conversations with the wider community about how they have to look after these areas if they want to use them. But it is really difficult. So thanks, Lynn, and I think a bit of clarity in the policy would be really good.
Thanks, Katie. I'm not seeing any other hands raised on this item, so I'm going to move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 8, which is land and property transfers and disposals, pages 59 to 62. And Danny, if you could come in on this one again, please.
Yep, thanks for that, Chair. So this particular report looks for committee to approve the transfer of the former Hollandbush nursery site, which is in Mill Road in Hamilton, and Kirkton House in Main Street, High Blantyre, from the General Services account to the Housing Revenue account for future use as part of the new council housing programme. The report also asks for committee to declare the 5 plots of land that are listed on Appendix B in the report surplus so that estates can conclude negotiations with the adjacent owners for their sale, and that's for use primarily as garden ground. Members have been asked this morning then therefore to approve the transfer of the land and property listed in Appendix A from the General Services account to the Housing Revenue account, and also to declare the land listed in Appendix B as surplus to council requirements. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Danny. I see, Jim, is your hand still up? Is that a legacy hand or is it?
No, it's a question for Danny.
Right, okay.
It's just a clarification. I know at one time we had different scales of payment for land that was, bought from the council for garden land, in terms of, if it was for an extension, there was one price per square metre. If it was for a lock-up, it was another price, and if it was just garden ground, it was a lower price. Do we still adopt that policy, and is there any way that we can prevent people, because it happens where people buy a bit of ground for garden land, and then the next thing we know there's an extension going up. But is that policy still there, or is it just, any land sold for garden land has no restrictions on it and the price is uniform?
We wouldn't necessarily put restrictions on it, but what we do when we're going through it with the estates team is that we would look at the development potential of that piece of land. So most of the pieces of the lands will be small strips at the side of somebody's house, or it's taken away a kind of corner just at a lane or whatever. So the estates team will pick that back up when they get through their valuation, Councillor Warthog, just in terms of what the development potential is of the land, and they would adjust the price accordingly. And that's also kind of looking into, what other incidentals that we might need to take into account when we're doing it. So if there are other costs that the council would incur through selling on pieces of land, then that would be included in the sale also. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
Jim.
Fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks very much, Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. The last one, 78 Union Street, Hamilton. Could you just try and tell me exactly where that is, please? Is in relation to sort of landmarks. Is that towards Peacock Cross, or is it back down towards the grammar school? Which side of the road is it on?
Right, I'm going to look out my window and try and explain this to you then, because I can see it from here. So
if
you go down beyond Montrose House and you were walking back out then onto the main street, Councillor Neil, there's a small lane that takes you down, and there's a stone detached house just as you get through the wee sort of park area, just in the right hand side. There used to be a council property a number of years back as well, and it's that property there, so it's towards the Peacock Cross end.
All right, thanks.
I think there's foundations already sort of semi-laid, Danny, if I'm thinking of the right house.
I'm assuming you are thinking of the right house, Councillor Ross. So because it's the facility at a garage being constructed.
Right, thanks for that.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Thanks very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 9, which is the South Lanarkshire Integration Scheme Update, pages 63 to 104. And Suman, if you could possibly give us an update on this, please.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Good morning, everybody. So in front of you is a paper setting out a recommendation to seek approval for the updated South Lanarkshire Integration Scheme. As members received from the covering paper in front of you, the Council and NHS Lanarkshire have an agreed integration scheme in place, which forms the basis for both organisations meeting the statutory obligations under the Public Bodies Joint Working Act. There is a statutory requirement for all parties to such documents to routinely review those schemes. In 2020, as the report sets out, a light touch review was undertaken and accepted on the basis that a further, more thorough process would be undertaken to update the review. That process has been undertaken and the revised review is in front of you today. I can confirm that officers of both the Council and NHS Lanarkshire have collaborated to undertake this work in a proportionate and thorough manner, and in doing so have engaged with all the necessary consultees in a manner that has been confirmed by our legal officers within the council. As 4.3 sets out within the paper then, in terms of the adjustments to the integration scheme in front of you, firstly, there'll be no material changes in terms of the substance. So the delegations from both the council and the health board are as they are. The changes as they're set out are cosmetic, so they relate to issues of terminology in the first instance, and secondly, actions or commitments made within the previous scheme which have now been signed off as they've been completed. 4.5 then summarises the position that we're in, which is that we've undertaken the statutory process, we've updated the scheme in accordance with the statutory obligations, and it's been brought forward here for approval today. I can also confirm that NHS Lanarkshire have approved this scheme at their most recent meeting of the 26th of January. Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
John, you're on mute.
Chair, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thanks very much, Suman, for that report. Does any colleague have questions? And I see Richard has his hand up. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points in regards to the paper, Suman, and regards to the issues with the GP services that I've had. And GP services mentioned quite heavily within the paper, and the pressure that these are under, and the care pathway that people should access without going to A&E. And I was just looking to find out, are we having any joint working groups with NHS Lanarkshire in regards to GP services going forward? As we know, GPs are going to be hard to get. As years go by, there is a shortage of GPs and surgeries are under immense pressure. So that was my kind of first question. The other 2 points I had was in regards to the Feely report and the health and social care, and also the forensic review that has been undertaken as well, because I think that may have an impact on the IGIB at some point going forward with these two reports and what comes out of them and implementation. So my understanding is from the forensic review that the low secure would then come under the IGIB if that's the way the recommendations are taken. So therefore there'll be some kind of implications in the IGIB at that point. And again, there was nothing really mentioned in there about the health and social care Feely report stuff that's come out as well. So I don't know if you can touch on any of that, Suman.
Gosh, I think you're way ahead of yourself there, Richard, but I'll get Suman to see if he can answer those questions. Thanks very much. Suman.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to, Councillor Nelson. So in terms of the first point, in terms of primary care service and specifically general practice, as members will know, general practice has currently got a managed suspension of services as part of the overall pressures within NHS Lanarkshire as a whole at the moment, which we are regularly reviewing. We have a plan for remobilising those services as the situation settles, and then looking forward there is ongoing work both being undertaken nationally as well as locally in terms of the development of general practice services across the piece. The Health Board has received routine reports in relation to GP sustainability, and I'm very happy to signpost you to those. And we will also be taking material through the IGB over the course of the coming year as this situation settles in terms of the arrangements we'll have in place. It is fair to say, as you've set out, that GPs are are under a considerable degree of pressure and have been proven difficult to recruit across the piece. That's not just true within Lanarkshire, that's a national issue. And considerable amount of work has been undertaken to think about how we need to remodel access to general practice in the whole, understanding that general practice, certainly nowadays, is a multidisciplinary field. So when you go into your practice or indeed engage with the practice over the phone or by digital in some cases, you may well be dealing with a practice nurse, an advanced nurse practitioner, or other allied health professional colleagues, or indeed pharmacists. So there's a whole range of services, and that's covered within the current GMS contract. NHS Lanarkshire has what's called a primary care improvement plan, which is our mechanism for taking forward commitments within that contract. And again, I can share that information with you, and the IGB do get regular updates about progress in respect of that. In relation to your points about the Feely review, so obviously Councillor has submitted a response to the government's consultations on a national care service, and that was subject to quite a detailed session that councillors took part in that was led by the Chief Executive. Government has just recently published the individual responses to that consultation. We're still awaiting their summary analysis, and indeed we're subsequent to that, we'll be awaiting the actual legislation that they'll be looking to put forward. So at this point, we actually don't know what the position is going to be in terms of a national care service. Within the proposals that were put forward, though, if that's taken forward, IGBs would be essentially superseded by community health and social care partnership boards, so a new construct. And whatever were the minimum delegation into that would be essentially be populating within that new entity. So at this point, there aren't any implications for any integration authority or any IGB across Scotland, because the legislative framework we're working in continues to be the Public Body Joint Working Act. We don't know what the legislation is going to be in terms of a national care service, and in terms of those areas that you've touched upon, if those are to be included within it, that would be for a new entity to take forward rather than the existing IGB. Does that go some way to answer your question, Councillor Nelson?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That's quite a comprehensive response into the question asked. I think just going back to the GP services point of view, because we've been under immense pressure for years prior to COVID. COVID's just added to it, if you like. And I think from an elected member's point of view, as we get asked, and I'm sure most of the councillors will probably agree, is most of our constituents will come to us about concerns about accessing the care pathway, etc. So I think it's just to reiterate the point of involving the elected members, if you like, to get us involved in those discussions. I know that might be hard to do, but to keep that information flowing at the same time, to make us aware of challenges, what's happening in the community, because it does help us to understand what's actually happening. I feel like I'm not meaning that as a criticism, but just as to go forward.
No, Councillor Nelson, I think it's a point very well made. I've had dialogue with a number of councillors, those included in this meeting and others in respect of that. The point I always reiterate to all of you is to remember that general practitioners are not part of the health board setup. They're all independent businesses in and of themselves. And so essentially what we have is a number of tripartite contracts between Scottish Government, IGB's boards, with each and every GP within, in this case, Lanarkshire. So it's quite it requires a certain degree of delicacy, if you like, in terms of negotiating and managing a way through that. But I'm very mindful of the need for elected members, whether it be local councillors or indeed elected members, representatives more widely, including MSPs and MPs, being up to speed with what we're doing. Point well made.
Thanks very much. Cleland, I see you've got your hand up. You want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And with apologies to Simon, just to demonstrate that a day is a long time in local government. Last night, on a confidential basis, colleagues in government shared with me, as part of my solace role, a summary document that's due to be published that gives the kind of summary of the feedback to the consultation. So our indications, and this is just an opportunity to share with elected members, the indication is that the Scottish Government at ministerial level will make an announcement. We expect it on the 22nd of February in relation to the consultation, and that will refer to the legislative proposals that will be laid before Parliament in the coming term. So that came out last night. I've kind of shared comments back with the colleagues who showed me the document to say that it's done very much as a kind of numbers game. So what number of people or what percentage of people agreed with the propositions in the original consultation feedback template. My view is that it's a particularly unsophisticated analysis that's been done so far. There might be a fuller version to come, and it doesn't really pick up a number of the more detailed or nuanced points that Council agreed to submit, along with the points that COSLA and other professional bodies have done. So I think the inference here is that this is viewed as providing a mandate for moving forward with a national care service, and a mandate for it to look quite similar to the original consultation proposals. But as we've noted, this is an enormous change. It's going to take the rest of the parliamentary term, so the next 4 years of development. So there's a lot of water to go under the bridge, but it just gives me an opportunity. And as I said, Simon and I haven't had a chance to speak this morning. It came out about 9 o'clock last night. So that's the kind of update just to share with members. Thanks.
Thanks, Cleland. Alec, you have your hand up.
Yeah,
It's not really a question for Suman. It was more the overall feeling you get from reading the report. It's basically saying, well, everything's all right and moving on. That may be from an officer's side, but as Councillor Nelson was saying, from a constituent side, I don't think it is working. And simply rolling over what we're doing at the moment isn't going to change anything. And I actually do think we're actually needing to have a greater look. Contracts for... I understand what you're saying about doctors not being part of the NHS, but they do have contracts to supply a service. Some of these are continually having problems raised with them, others aren't. Yet there doesn't seem to be any work done to actually address the practices that are generating most of the complaints through ourselves. The care pathways, again, has been highlighted. It may be working from an officer's point of view, but members of the public don't feel that it is. And I think we do need to address these issues. And a report that comes over saying basically everything's okay, let's keep going, I don't think will help.
Thanks, Alec. I certainly sympathise with some of your views there regarding several practices which don't seem to be up to the match as much as others. But I think there is a way forward there, and hopefully we'll reach that understanding as we go forward. Is there any other questions on this item? I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 10, which is Tackling Poverty Working Group, progress report on 105 to 110. And I would ask Rhonda if she's there to give us a report on this, please. Rhonda.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this paper is an update on the work that the cross-party group on tackling poverty has undertaken. The group was agreed by full council to be established, and you'll see in section 4 the table that shows the range of information that they've considered over the meetings that they've held. Excuse me, sorry. Through that, the group have been able to understand how each of the resources in the council works to contribute to the tackling poverty agenda, and how that works together across the council, as well as the partnership and the various partnership groups which address different specific aspects of poverty related issues. They've also looked at the data that's available about poverty and its impact in people's lives, and how that works together to inform the actions that are taken, and they have looked at some of the lived experience feedback which is provided by various groups, and taking consideration of how that impacts on this work as well. So in section 5, the group have brought several recommendations that they would like to refer to the committee, hopefully for approval. The first one is around understanding the impact of the work that has been undertaken, and in particular how we're articulating that. So there's a lot of action, and we've got a great deal of data that explains what that action is and what's been done, but how effectively are we explaining the difference and the change that is making in people's lives, and through that what's most effective around tackling poverty. The second recommendation from the group is that we continue to use the information that we have in the lived experience that we're gathering, and also the impact understanding that we would develop further to look at the best solutions to resource around poverty as we go forward. They've also suggested that we continue to make use of the Fairer Scotland duty and use it to as a means of holding council services to account around the work that they're doing and the impact of poverty. And finally, that we would create an action plan around how this is all coordinated and integrated into the work of the council and with partners as well. So recognising that this wouldn't sit in isolation, it would be part of the wider picture, but looking at how it's all pulled together around that theme of poverty as we go forward. And in section 5.2, you just see an explanation of how that action plan would gather this work together and make sure it takes consideration of the existing statutory requirements, and particularly look towards the new council and community plans and be aligned to what's happening within them. And we would suggest that we would report this back to the executive committee at a future date. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rhonda, for that report. Does any colleague have any questions of the report? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendations. Oh, sorry, Alec.
Sorry, I must be in a grumpy mood today. No objection to anything in the report. It's just the fact that when was this decided? 2018, 4 years ago? Didn't set up till a year later, didn't meet till a year after that. 7 meetings over the 4 years. And what's the outcome? Gained an understanding, considered this, taken note, and examined the work. No real outcomes. And I would have thought something as important as tackling poverty would have had a much more active time and actually been able to do something. Just an observation.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. I think it's been valuable from the point of view that members of the working group got to see exactly what the council was doing and has been doing and is doing to tackle poverty. But I note your comments. Lindsay, I see your hands raised.
Thanks, John. I think that Alec might need a cup of tea and a biscuit today by the sounds of it, to make him a cheerier man.
Something much stronger, Lindsay.
I didn't think you would partake in that, Alec. Just to say, COVID is held this up. Also, I was the chair of it, and I obviously went on maternity, which held it up probably as well. So that's why it took so long. Probably should have been quicker, but no, it was alongside the people who were on it with me, it was a very, very useful forum to be on, because it actually gave us an overview of what the council were doing and what each department were doing. I think the conclusion of it came at an awkward time, because we're now going into an election and nobody wanted to show their hand of what actually they thought, because it could be election promises that if they mentioned anything. So I think that was possibly why the recommendation is the way it is. But we felt as the working group that actually we need to quantify and look at how the things that we do are impacting, to see if we are actually spending the money at the right places. And that's why we've came to the conclusion that we have. So I'll not take up any more time, but I do think it has been a really useful project to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay, for these comments. Eileen.
Thank you, Chair. Really, just to say, I was lucky enough to be twice a substitute on the. If Alex says it was 7 meetings, it's 7 meetings, but twice I know I was a substitute. And I was very impressed with all the members of the group who worked closely together and worked as one. And also I was impressed with the reports that came to the meetings that I sat in. And I think it was a very worthwhile piece of work, and one which we should, when a new council is formed, continue, because it gives you a very good oversight of the things that are happening in the council and the things that matter really greatly to a lot of our constituents. But for the twice I was on it, I was impressed, and I was impressed by the input of all members. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen, for those comments. I don't see any other hand raised, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. That takes us up to the last item, urgent business, and I don't see there's any urgent business. So I thank everybody for being at the meeting today. This is going to be followed by the Climate Change Committee, and I would put the start of the Climate Change Committee back to 12 o'clock, and that would allow everyone here the chance to have a comfort break and grab themselves a cup of coffee. Okay, so thanks very much for your attendance today, and I look forward to seeing those members who are going to be in the Climate Change Committee. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.